and we are here to talk about the South Bayfront, essentially. Would you call the roll, please?
Council members Davis?
Here.
Savage?
Here.
Vice Mayor Bukowski? Here. And Mayor Cassis.
We may as well go ahead and do our Pledge of Allegiance at this point, leading into our meetings. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let the record show. I'm here. All right. Are there any citizens to be heard on matters that are not on tonight's special meeting agenda? All right, there being none, we'll move on to our study session. John, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I'd turn it over to Pat O'Keefe, who will provide a report, and Ron Gerber will do that also.
Yes, agency chair and agency members. Tonight's discussion in study session is concerning the South Bayfront Regional Mall project. Approximately 3 months ago, the developer for this project, in which you have a exclusive negotiating rights agreement, Orient and Western, requested an extension in order to essentially change the project concept. The agency granted a 3-month extension in order to allow staff to investigate what the various development scenarios could be for the site area. The purpose of tonight's study session is for staff to report back to you concerning the research that we've conducted over the last 3 months and the conclusions that we've come to. Staff was assisted in this effort by 2 consultants. One was Eileen Marinan, who's a real estate consultant to various institutional investors, and she conducted an analysis of several real estate projects that we think may be relevant, and her analysis was attached to your staff report. We also have with us tonight, who will be presenting along with Ron Gerber, our project manager, Dave Paoli of Field Paoli, who are renowned retail architects who have numerous projects under their belt, but local ones that you may be familiar with include the Corte Madera Village Center and also the Stanford Shopping Center. Tonight's goal is to run through our analysis, to take a few minutes to do that, and then to come back and conclude with the staff recommendation concerning a resolution that appears later on the agency's regular agenda. And I have put in front of you on the dais an outline of tonight's presentation so you can track along with where we are in it. Following then the staff's recommendation, we would recommend that you hear comments from Orient and Western. Their representatives are here tonight. Also general comments from the audience. I understand that there may be representatives of the property owners here who wish to speak to you tonight. And then there's no action that needs to be taken, specific action that needs to be taken during the study session. Your action would consist of the resolution, which is on the later agenda. That resolution is listed on the consent calendar. I would recommend to you that you pull it off of consent. Orient and Western has some concerns with the language of the resolution, and they would like to suggest some changes, and I think you ought to hear them out on that. So you could do so at that time, rather than mix that together with the kind of the bigger picture discussion. So with that, I would just like to remind you of what was in the staff report. Was essentially kind of 4 areas that we need some direction on from the agency board. The first is, should the agency continue to take an active role in fostering the redevelopment of this site? Secondly, for you to consider 4 different land use alternatives that we investigated, and that will be Ron and Dave Paoli's presentation. Third, should we continue to extend the Orient and Western negotiating rights agreement, or should we solicit for new developers? And fourth, we're suggesting that the project might be phased. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron and Dave Paoli.
Thank you, Pat, and agency members. I think the analysis that we've done over the last couple of months has probably been as thorough as any staff analysis looking at kind of land use planning that I'm aware of since I've been here over the last about 6 years. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to spend a certain amount of time taking a look at this site is because, as we all know, it's so important. 200,000 cars a day drive by. It's our front door. And also, we have a stake here. The agency owns about a third of the site. And so there's an ownership stake that the agency and the city has here. And again, it is our gateway. And then we've also not only spent time acquiring the property, there's a really painful reminder elsewhere on tonight's agency agenda that we spent and are spending money to resolve environmental problems on the site. So we've invested time and money in a variety of ways on this property, and it's so important. So when the developers wanted to talk about changing the concept of either having maybe one or no department stores on the site, we wanted to do an investigation, changing the concept of the project and what would that mean. So there are a variety of things we need to quickly review. And I think first and foremost is what role the agency should or could play over in this part of the city. Because we have such an important stake here as a stakeholder in this site, and because it's so important, we think that the agency should keep playing a role, and the city should play a role, that the agency council should take an active involvement in what's happening here and work in a coordinated fashion with the surrounding property owners who are also, in some cases, looking to work with the developer to put in development here. This is an important site, and we feel that it's real important to keep playing a role, working with developing the future of this part of our city. With that, with staff's belief that we need to be playing a role, that the city and agency need to play a role, we wanted to look at what some of the choices and options might play out in this important part of the city. And so we looked at a number of possible scenarios that could play out. And with that, I'd ask Dave Paoli to come up and who helped us look at some of the design considerations.
Good evening. What I would like to do, I think how I can be of best service to you this evening is to try to be your eyes in terms of what these projects would look like if they were developed. As we look at the alternatives to try to visually describe, because we're working from very simple diagrams, as you'll see here. And we're going to go through a series of options here. Could we leave the front lights on, please? Yeah, far right. Yeah. Thank you. That's fine, yeah. And then I will describe the visual aspects, and then Ron is going to talk about some of the other elements. We'll kind of trade off back and forth here. But the first scheme that we had studied is, you could describe it as the mall option. It's not really but it is the Orient Western scheme, but we've obviously taken some liberties with it. But essentially what the scheme is 3 to 4 stories of a parking garage starting at grade with 3 stories of retail development above. I mean, it is essentially an 85 to 100-foot mass of building that is roughly 1,500 feet long, if you can envision that, 4 to 5 blocks long, paralleling the shell mound axes. We have made the assumption in this plan that a freeway off-ramp would be required for a typical anchored regional center mall development. And one of the aspects that I think that it's important to point out is that it has some impact on the hotel site, which is in the bottom half of the revised shell mound right-of-way, by reducing that property area to some degree. And we'll talk about the other alternatives later on. In essence, there is a token amount of of retail that one could do at street level that could survive. But it really doesn't create a sense of street life, or it does not make a very strong visual or pedestrian connection between adjacent development. It's pretty much an island unto itself. There's also significant cost of parking. Projects like this are very costly to develop, and the cost of the parking is certainly a factor in the economics of the overall project. The scheme does allow for separate development of the hotel site quite easily. It stands on its own. It would not be, in our opinion, disruptive to the development of the regional center site. However, the land that is between the existing shell mound right-of-way that kind of bisects the site left to right, if you will, down the middle, and the relocated shell mound right-of-way as it drops down in the diagram that is owned by the city, we would not recommend that it be developed separate from the regional center. That is their view window to the freeway, which is very, very important, and it would be too great a sacrifice to the quality of the development that could come behind it, and it should be really thought of as a complete development, contrary to the hotel site.
Would you point out on there where you're talking about?
You can see in the scheme that we've shown a separate retail. In our recommendation, it is not a desirable thing.
I'm sorry, could I hold you up just 1 second? No, stay right where you are. We're going to get you a microphone so you're on the record and the people at home can hear you. Thank you.
As I said, we've shown a separate retail development, but in our recommendations for the staff, that it's very clear, and as you can see, this being the window of the freeway, that it would, for the little amount of retail you could develop there, it would sacrifice the quality of the much larger project behind it. Is not something we would recommend.
Thank you.
I guess that being said, the question is, what about a regional mall? Where are they, and what about the department stores? And I think that one of the disadvantages the developers have experienced the last year and a half to 20 months or so, when they first came to the agency, right about the time they got here and started working on their agreement, Macy's, one of the major anchor stores in the Bay Area, was acquired by Federated Stores out of Cincinnati. And as the developers got further into the project, they found that Emporium Capital was also acquired by Federated Stores. So two of the most important department store anchors in the area have been acquired. And about every 4 or 5 days in the press now, we see what's going to get spun off, what's going to close, what's going to be sold, what's going to be converted to Sears. And I think that kind of what we're realizing is that with all the flux in the department store industry, I think it's ill-advised for us to sit around and wait to try and get 2 or 3 fashion department stores to anchor a project. And I think most of the studies have recently shown by the shopping center industry itself, because of all the acquisitions and mergers coming along, there's only going to be a few real active players left. And to try and do a multi-fashion department store anchor and to wait for all this to play out, especially when we combine that with the other research that we'll be talking about, I don't think it necessarily makes sense to kind of throw all our eggs in that 2 or 3 fashion department store anchored basket. And so, with all the radical changes happening in the department store industry, we're not really recommending to sit around and wait to try and make 2 or 3 department store anchors work. And so, looking, well, what else might happen if we don't do a multi-department fashion department store or regional mall? What other kinds of scenarios could likely play out on the Bayfront?
The other alternative we looked at is one that you certainly have had experience with it, and it's the big box option, as it's referred to. And there's no question that this is a very parking intensive scheme. It has limited cross-shopping. People tend to come to shop one store, and it doesn't really encourage a lot of pedestrian activity as we think of with small shops and restaurants. It's generally low density. We tend to have massive blocky-looking buildings. Tenants, I think you've done a good job with Catellus, fight for their strong identity of their store, so design control can be difficult very often. It just doesn't lend itself. I know there are certain elements of Catellus that tie back into San Pablo to make that neighborhood connection. In its inherent nature, it doesn't lend itself to, if you will, a neighborhood identity or weaving into the fabric of adjacent development. This scheme still allows for separate, however, hotel phasing, a separate development. But in addition to that, it's also because of its rent structure. The rents are lower. It's difficult to achieve a higher quality level of design, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. The economics just aren't there. So certainly the trying to get some enhancement of the enrichment of the building facades is much more difficult, certainly not impossible, but you don't tend to see a lot of public amenities with this kind of development also for that very reason.
I think another concern would have to do with what would happen if we do facilitate or encourage big box development. One of the things that you find that there are a certain limited number of players, and these stores all tend to be about 50 to 100,000 square feet. So you'll see maybe 6 to 10 of these in a more urban or a less power center big box concept. You may have 40 to 60 stores, where this may only have 5 to 10 stores in a site this size. And one of the things that we know from all of the context we get from the retailers and brokers and people that are interested in getting these retailers on here, a lot of them replicate a number of tenants that are already here in Emeryville. And the question is, how many different types of stores do you want in any of these large categories? Obviously, 1 or 2 could go out of business in a few months. And another concern is that the lifespan of these stores. What some cities have found that some of these stores, their format lasts 36 to 60 months, and then they go, as they say in the industry, they go dark, and they shut down. When that happens, I think the life cycle of these types of shopping centers are entering a new phase. They've only been around 5 to 7 years in California, and what they're finding is that when one or two of these stores go dark in your shopping center, that might mean that instead of only 1 out of 50 or 60 stores, it may represent 20 to 40% of your entire project. And the institutional investors are taking a second look at power centers, putting their money into them because they're realizing these stores become empty. It isn't always easy to fill them. And especially on a site like the South Bayfront, if one of the tenants doesn't do well, you might have a building that's 1 to 2.5 acres under roof, a concrete tilt-up building that stands vacant for a period of time. And I think that's, so there's a couple other reasons in addition to the one Dave has discussed that we're not really that excited about trying to facilitate a big box additional kind of annex to the East Bay Bridge Center at this point.
The next option that we wanted to show you was, I guess because there has been some interest, is the auto mall option. But we really tried to look at it in terms of this site and considering the density more as you think of the auto row on Van Ness Avenue, that historical kind of precedent, some of which is still there, and a lot of it is gone. So the idea was not to think in terms of large, lots, but try to this scheme has structured parking along the back side of the site, along the railroad, and a series of buildings that had common walls, one-story showroom buildings that had common walls, trying to beef up the density with the idea. Obviously, you could even go to a step further than that. It can work. It has worked historically. The things to say about it, that it certainly is desirable to try to get some of the maintenance functions off-site, which makes the business arrangements and the deal, so to speak, more difficult to do, and to try to get some of the auto storage off-site as well, if possible. It also has difficulties in terms of adjacent development. They tend to be, as you know, bright lights and sound systems and adjacent development of more commonly known retail might not really want to kind of sidle up to this in a very comfortable way. There's also an image problem. Is it the kind of image you want? Never, not in any way being negative about it in one way or the other. And certainly there isn't the kind of street life, quite obviously, that you might think of in a more urban development.
I think Dave's design comments kind of said the development concerns that we have, that if you can convince the dealerships that the storage lots, some or most of the vehicles could be stored off-site, if they're willing to do multi-story buildings, I think it's certainly an alternative concept to look at, but again, it needs to really be cautiously planned and designed and considered because of, again, the impact. Who would locate next to a center like this, and could you integrate it with other uses? And I think we're absolutely not ruling something like this out, but just a real note of caution that if this is a direction you'd like staff to go, to understand what some of the implications are of trying to attract other kinds of development or other kinds of land uses next to it. Again, because typically they have these large, well-lit, almost like spotlights, large PA systems making announcements oftentimes. So those are the kind of operational aspects that would need to really be negotiated and considered if you want to pursue uses like this. I think now we'll talk about, based upon our research, what I think staff is looking at as kind of a preferred alternative.
This option is referred to as a mixed-use option, but it more specifically is thought of as at least initially, a non-traditionally anchored centered, non-department store anchored centered. But in the design that we developed here, and I can point that out if you'd like, is that we had also looked at the option that a future department store anchor could be added, or other forms of retail could be added. What we're thinking in terms of here are retail and office uses. As I said, with the potential to add a department store anchor at some time in the future. The density is significantly less, about half of what the mall option scheme is, of about 1 million square feet, 400,000 to 500,000 square feet. It's a combination of 1, 2, and maybe multi-story buildings combined with it. A kind of a different feel with a series of parking garages that may be elements that are, rather than sandwiched under the entire development as the mall scheme was, they might be at the ends of the development, more as garage buildings, if you will. This kind of a scheme, and we'll show you some built examples of this, one of which we were involved with personally, does provide for options of creating a very nice street life. It also offers great flexibility in phasing. It should, however, be done under the overall guide of a master plan, but that master plan can also offer a lot of flexibility in terms of what subsequent phases could be in terms of uses. It's not a rigid and tight thing. As I said, the parking garages really help to bring up the density, and as we've shown it here, it really is a street scene of one-story shops and multi-story anchored buildings and or offices above the retail shops. I think that
we're going to start to just briefly walk you through examples of some of these projects. And I think one of the things that we realized from our research that we wanted to clarify what kind of projects we looked at. These are destination, primarily retail projects, and they are projects that are not power centers with the big box retailers. And they take a couple variations on the theme. And we're going to start walking you through a couple of these variations on these themes of how these specialty centers or entertainment centers in some cases are working. The latest concept that you're probably going to hear a lot about over the next year and a half or 2 years is a concept they're calling the urban entertainment centers. What these are depends upon who's building them, but they tend not to have many clothing stores. They tend they're not a big box retail project. Oftentimes they're things like movie theaters with a 20 or 30,000 square foot bookstore. The movie theaters will have 10 to 20 screens. You'll have 5 or 6 restaurants. In some cases, they'll vary the theme from location to location. Sometimes they'll really bombard the senses with things like Virgin Records and Nike Town and Planet Hollywood. Sometimes some of the developments are being proposed. They've put in virtual reality parlors. Some developers are trying to hook these into the gaming industry and casinos. And so one of the things we've realized is that for a lot of developments, which I guess we're calling alternatives to malls, alternatives as it were, the clustering these different uses and bringing people there to spend time and almost all sorts of people, sometimes families, setting up amusement centers. One of the things it helped us realize is we looked at Emeryville, and in some cases we really set the stage for this kind of development. When you look at all the uses everybody's trying to put in, 10 or 20 plex theaters, 20 to 30,000 square foot bookstores. Kind of sounds familiar with the UA Theater here, Borders Bookstores. Doing indoor recreation, we've got City Beach and City Rock here. We've got Chalkers Billiard Parlors. We've got Grand Slam, the indoor batting cage. So, and we've got interesting restaurants, the public market. So in some cases, we're already doing this. We've even got gaming here. So in some cases, Emeryville is kind of a step ahead of others, and Emeryville in some sense becoming kind of the downtown of the East Bay in some sense. We're really setting the stage for the next level of retail that can come in here. One center that we took a look at in Costa Mesa was a redevelopment site. It's called Triangle Square. It's 5 acres. It's about 200,000 square feet. And it's got some of these splashy new tenants. It doesn't have clothing stores, and about 30 or 40% of the shoppers there are males, which is about 2 to 3 times the normal amount that go into shopping centers. And it was a redevelopment project. It again includes, I think, about an 8-plex theater, Nike Town, Virgin Records, and the thing we noticed about it was the really important design amenities that are really quality. The plazas, the landscaping, the architectural details. They even have a 50,000 square foot underground supermarket in the project as well. And it is very urban. It is very dense. Now we've got 2 projects together here built by the same developer. These are in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's called Hilton Village in the Borgata. Again, we didn't go there, but we got the site plans from the operators of the center. What's interesting about these is, again, these were not malls. They're unenclosed. They have no department store. But here you can get an example of how you can bring people together with different uses. They found tenants that normally don't go into malls. They've attracted lots of high-quality restaurants. There's a movie theater. There's a hotel. There's offices. So they've integrated the mixes, and it's worked so well. They're right across the street from one another. They have underground parking that they share, that they're doing the third one a mile and a half away. So there's examples of these centers being developed all over the country that we're finding. And over the last decade, we're finding more and more. Some developers have done 5, 6, 7, or 8 of these centers. One of the things that has become prevalent in the discussions as the tenants that we've talked to describe how these are fairly tricky centers, and it's important to really have good multi-project experience in order to make these work well. Another one that we found out about was in Redmond, Microsoft territory, and that is the developer was going to build a 6-acre regional mall of almost 2 million square feet. The community opposed it. Several of the acres went bankrupt. And what they're changing to do is taking about 120 acres, and the developers are doing half of it's dedicated to open space, and the remainder is going to be about 480,000 square feet of specialty retail, movie theaters, clothing stores. And this one's to start construction in January of this coming year. And this is the Redmond Town Center. And Dave's got a couple of projects he's going to talk about briefly as well.
In Boca Raton in Florida, the Meisner Park is described by, as you've seen from the brochure perhaps, that as a village within the city. And it really does harken back to traditional forms of street front retail, a novel idea. And just to give you a closer view here, that essentially what we have is ground floor, single floor retail shops with offices and luxury apartments above. You can see that there's quite a variety of building height, 2 to 4 and I think 6-story beyond. But essentially, it is some of the images that depict the fact that there is a tremendous amount of focus on the quality of the public spaces to make these work, and to make them successful. They also are combined with a large number of restaurants to create that kind of sense of street life, public events, as you can see, the theaters and so forth. There are theaters in the project, but there are also even amphitheaters for cultural and local events to make them successful. But if you can understand this diagram, essentially it's a main street that's 2 blocks long. It's a very, very simple and basic idea, but something that has worked quite well. It has auto access, as you saw down the center. It has a linear park. There are some gazebos that you can see in the diagram that were in the photos before, and it's a very, very pleasant and successful project. A project of a different scale is in a restaurant near the Dulles Airport. Reston, of course, as many of you know, was a complete new community developed out of raw land, and they also more recently, 4 or 5, was it maybe 8 years ago, have developed the downtown, and it's a much higher density, as you can see. Although it does have still single-floor retail at the ground floor, the office buildings are a much higher density than the previous project, but it's still a Main Street project, a very pleasant quality of street life, but a much higher density than the previous project. So you can really kind of take these to quite a broad range of, from 400,000 to 1 million square feet, really can be accommodated even with this concept that offers that range of flexibility. And a project that we were involved with, I see the slide is in backwards, but is a not traditionally anchored center. There are some small anchors here, but essentially it was the mixture of retail, in great part unanchored retail with office space, and really of the weaving of the office space and the height of the building, the mass of the building, with really one-story buildings. And it does create a very nice sense of a urban place, but again, there is a very strong emphasis and focus on the quality of the public spaces in order to make these work. The center area has gone through some recent transition with even a greater emphasis on food, restaurants, delis, and so forth in its recent renovation. What I wanted to end with was just I think the messages are that with this kind of traditionally unanchored retail, it's anchored in its own way. I mean, these are a combination of a series of anchors of retail tenants that have a very strong name in the marketplace, lifestyle retail tenants, and restaurants that are anchors as well, that really collectively create the synergy sometimes with theater, sometimes not, to make these projects successful. I think the other thing is that I think that the project as it's now envisioned with 1 million square feet, that you can achieve that kind of density obviously with the mixed-use project, but you can also achieve a level of urban quality and street life and something that is the scale and size I think that would be appropriate for Emeryville, even at 400,000 to 500,000 square feet there. It really is still possible to do and would fit in very well with the downtown development. I think the other main message is that it does offer some flexibility to incrementally grow the project as long as the initial phases need to be of substantial size to have enough strength on their own to survive. But it does allow for some flexibility as you develop the project. And also, I think the underlying benefit that I have an understanding is important to development in Emeryville in a general sense, that it allows you to kind of more graciously, if you will, link the fabric of this kind of a development into the fabric of the larger Emeryville community. Thank you.
Mr. Paley, where is this particular?
This is in Corte Madera.
And is there any housing associated with that center?
Not with this project. There was in the Meisner project.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
How long has the Meisner project been up and running?
It was done. It was 80. I think it was done 83 to 86. It was done in 3 phases.
And that's been a fairly successful project?
Yes. Yeah.
And was that a redevelopment project, or was it a developer that went in?
Redevelopment area.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I had a couple of questions or observations.
I'm sorry, I just want to ask real quick. Ron, are we kind of where we want to be, or Patrick, in terms of?
Not quite yet. We just have a couple more comments, and then we'll be done with our presentation.
Okay, could we hold the questions for just another minute? I'm sorry, Nora, I should have stopped you two here. We'll kind of try to keep on track here with staff's plan. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I think in summary, so what we've done is we've looked at some projects that are out there that don't have department store anchors. They're becoming more commonplace. I think it's one of those bad news or good news. People say, well, we can't drive 10 minutes away to look at one to see how it works. And that's the good news, though, because it hasn't run the gamut of the malling of America. They're just not that common. And a lot of times you can't develop these kind of specialty niche centers because of the area has been overbuilt. We don't have that problem of being over-retailed in this trade area for a lot of these specialized uses. Again, we saw that these projects all had very strong architecture or very attractive public spaces, and they're not unanchored. The mix of the types of uses you put in here are the anchors. That's what's really been special about the success of these places. A number of the project operators that were interviewed said that their major concern was that they only acquired a certain amount and they didn't have phases to which they could expand. Because once they put in the first 100 to 150,000 square feet, they found that many of the stores are doing so well that they want to enlarge. And we're not talking about 50,000 square foot stores going into 100,000. We're talking about 3 to 5,000 square foot stores going to 10,000 square feet. So sales, in some cases, we were amazed that the operators, once they found out that we were a city trying to find out about projects that were successful, they realized we weren't competitors of theirs in their market area. And we thought we could maybe get 10 or 15 minutes of their time. In some cases, they spent over an hour on the phone. They sent site plans. They sent brochures. They got really excited talking about their project. In some cases, the people that built them were really interested to find out where we're going to go, what we want to do. And so, we're seeing these trends happen. And again, I think it's fortunate that they're not commonplace, that we have an opportunity to do something different and kind of special that hasn't been done in this part of the country very often. And one of the other things that we've noticed when we did take a look at a couple of these centers, again, that there was a strong trend towards making the centers kind of a community gathering place, very different from a power center type concept. Many of the retailers that were interviewed said pretty clearly that one of the things that there's a number of aspects that these types of projects can only work in select areas. They also said that they're tricky and that you really need a good team of development professionals that have done a number of solid retail projects of this type, working with these groups of tenants that have had long-term multi-project tenant relationships. And so we tried to pay attention and listen closely. We got a lot of information from these people. Many were very candid, very forthright. They were telling us the kind of rents they were getting. They told us the kind of sales they were getting. So it was really helpful in trying to put this all together. And I think that one of the things that we listened to when they mentioned about what would you do differently or what was really important to the success, when they talked about the need to have a team that's done these types of projects before, have multi-project experience, and have the relationships from past projects to these tenants. That was, I think, one of the things that really led us to our discussion about why we think that it's important for us to take this time and maybe reopen it and maybe let other people that might be interested, other developers, take a look at this, and certainly not shut out the people who have spent Orient and Western, teamed with Yarmouth. Provide them the opportunity to submit as well, because they know the trade area, they've been familiar with the site, but we think that it's important to look for a developer solicitation process. We also know that there's strong hotel interest in the area, and I think the fact that if it's carefully done, the project should be master planned, but we should open it up for hotels to look at being able to be developed simultaneously, but also to make sure it's well planned so they don't interfere with one another, so that they can work together. And I think also be working in a coordinated fashion with any developer interest who's looking at the Barbary Coast site as well. And I think with Pat, he has some concluding remarks as well.
So then, as we mentioned at the beginning, later on on your agenda, there is a resolution that would end the formal relationship that we have right now with Orient and Western. It would direct staff to come back to the agency, and we would hope to do that on the December 5th meeting with a new RFP, RFQ solicitation of developers for both the hotel aspect and the retail aspect. And if people wanted to combine those together and submit a joint proposal, they could do so. Orient and Western would be very welcome to resubmit under the new scenario, and that we would spend a couple of months gathering those, and if we have multiple submittals to you, bring them to you with a recommendation. So that's basically kind of the conclusion of the research that we've done. I've also listed on your agenda here that you may want to hear from Orient and Western, and then general comments from the audience. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, now I'd like to ask what the pleasure of the agency is on this. Do we want to go ahead with our questions now, or do we want to hear from the developers that are here, or how do you want to proceed?
All right, I just wanted to,
Fire away, Ken.
well, one of the things about the development of this area that has come to my attention is that we don't really have a planned theme for this area. We have a plan for San Pablo Avenue to revitalize it and kind of tie it together with the streetscape, but we don't have a plan like that over here. One of the things that concerns me is years back when Powell Street Plaza was built and the marketplace was developed, the planner said that if you develop Powell Street Plaza, the marketplace isn't going to be a successful retail place. And one of the things that concerns me here is the most prime property we have is Powell Street Plaza. And I'm not so sure that we shouldn't try to be working with Powell Street Plaza to connect that retail center with all of the rest of the retail that's planned in the area, because the rest of it's kind of hidden behind Powell Street Plaza. And it concerns me because access was a main question. The reason they wanted to get an extra freeway ramp was because of the access. Well, in the absence of getting that, we need to make the Powell Street freeway off-ramp as accessible as possible to this site. And somehow or another, we have the 40th Street Bridge, which is going to handle a huge volume of traffic. And I'm not sure where or how that traffic is going to filter out when it gets on this side. So I guess one of the things I'm saying here is I think we need to look at developing a central theme and character for this area, and that'll certainly help everybody involved. If Powell Street Plaza could be encouraged to cooperate here, it would benefit them as well as anybody who was participating. I mean, possibly, we could take another look at the Powell Street Plaza parking lot and maybe come up with a better way of accessing Powell Street rather than going around that loop. I just think the whole area needs to be looked at, and we got to come up with some kind of theme for it to help make it successful.
Any other comments or questions at this point from council?
Mayor Cassis, I would like to hear from anyone in the audience who wants to comment on the presentation of this issue. Will come back before us in the agency meeting, but we still have a little bit of time here if anyone would like to come forward and talk. I'd like to hear what people have to say.
I just want to be sure, though, that all the agency members had an opportunity to ask any immediate questions that they have. Even though we're going to go. Bobby, okay for now? And Greg, you're okay for right now? Okay. Let's...
I guess I do have one question of Patrick, and that is we have an example over on 4th Street in Berkeley of a very, very, very successful retail center that kind of grew like Topsy. Denny Abrams, he put Betty's Ocean View in there, and then several other attractive shops, and that has grown into the type of kind of shopping center just in that area. And I'm wondering, are those the kinds of people that we would be looking for in this particular concept?
Yes, I think that's kind of an exciting area, and it has the kind of tenant mix that would be very applicable here, and it would be a combination of tenants that have a presence in numerous locations combined with tenants that are very local and are homegrown. The trick will be in this project is in 4th Street, of course, you are working with existing buildings, and so it could happen easily over time. The trick here will be how do we create that first step, that first kind of mass of tenants with a new project, and then make sure we allow enough space that it can be expanded as it takes off and becomes successful. And I think one of the ways that we thought about doing that was hinted at on the mixed-use site plan is that you start with the site area that we've been working with, and then you work towards Powell as a potential expansion area in the future.
And just one other question. I was particularly taken with the Meisner Center in Florida with the inclusion of housing there, because clearly, depending on the height of the housing, some of the most fabulous views in the bay would be available to people.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think during the interviews with the people at Meisner Park, it was pointed out that housing really wasn't thought of as part of the master plan project initially, but they started to do some housing, and it became so successful they added additional housing because people were so excited at being at this place.
Well, and you get more of a street life through the 15 hours a day at least, which is a critical aspect to how we want the city to be. I'll stop.
Dick, let me ask one. Ron, let me ask you one question, because as I was listening to you giving your presentation, you kept bringing up the word phasing. Why did you keep bringing that word up?
There's a certain amount of land available or developable in the South Bayfront. The area that we've been working with Orient and Western is about 23 acres. To the south is another 15 acres that Barbary has that they want to develop. Some of the square footages that we've seen anywhere around 100 to 200,000 square feet, that's not a lot of square footage compared to 1 million square feet. Now what happens a lot of times is that you may be able to court some of these really strong tenants, specialty tenants and apparel stores initially to come in for the kind of first wave of 100 to 150,000 square feet, and maybe you get restaurants tied together with a hotel to make a cohesive development. In a suburban model, 150,000 square feet would be developed on 15 acres. 200,000 square feet would be developed on 20 acres. The site that we're currently working on with Orient and Western, I'm not so sure we'd want to just keep allowing that kind of low FAR on a suburban level. So I think Councilmember Bukowski made an excellent point. What about Powell Street Plaza and working with them? One of the reasons that's an excellent suggestion is that they've been so successful. They would like more parking. So we have a real interesting opportunity to almost introduce, in some cases or some portions of the site, structured parking without 400,000 or 500,000 square feet of development coming in, maybe 100, 150,000 that you could tie in maybe with a certain amount of offices, and make that work with the Powell Street Plaza parking demand too, to start structuring parking in an earlier phase of the development. And I think that that was a really I think an excellent point about talking to Powell Street Plaza. And then we don't also want to forget that just across the railroad tracks, we've got Chiron coming online, and they're crying, or there's a crying need for a hotel here to work with them. And you can start to look at the possible ways you can link this as a mixed use. So we really have an interesting opportunity here when we kind of step back and look at how all the pieces can come together by doing it in phases. We may not be talking about over 5 years, maybe talking about depending upon what the initial tenant interest is. Can we do hotels with restaurants first? Will the development team be able to bring a certain amount of those kind of powerful retailers that are almost magnets for lots of other retailers? Can we get that first wave in right away? It may very well be. It may very well be. But that's why we're talking about phases.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that struck me as I was listening to this presentation here, and this concept of the village, and with a central pass-through, whether it's pedestrian or vehicles included, is as we're trying to take a look at Ken's idea for the Powell Street Plaza and the whole area, maybe this same kind of survey and same kind of information needs to focus us even back at the marketplace, because as we know, we've just gone through this process of how the road is going to go through the marketplace, and that was a big concept at the beginning, is that the road was going to stay next to the marketplace, so that the east side of that area could be developed into a block of retail and maybe housing and parking, and we've gone away from that now with the angle all the way through. But with this kind of information in mind, maybe that should be revisited. I know we're getting close to that happening, but if it makes sense here in the South Bayfront, why doesn't it make sense in the marketplace? So as we examine this further, I think that we really do need to relook at all this, and it is interesting because as a city, I mean, we've started focusing a lot of our attention on our housing and where we're going. What's the big picture? Here just very recently, I mean, and looking at the Park Street overlay, what do we want for that area of town? And really, we're getting ready to develop one of the most desirable pieces of property in the Bay Area. So I think we need to be creative about it and try to figure out where we're going. So it'll be interesting to see what we can come up with. And I really think it's worth us putting in as much time in study sessions and information gathering as is necessary for us, because this is the stuff that's going to be really visible. This is, and we can do a lot of stuff over on San Pablo Avenue. It definitely needs to be done. We need to bring up that whole area of town and revitalize it, bring it to life. But what we're doing out here is going to be so visible for the future of the city. So, any other comments?
Yeah, you know, the way we've handled the rest of these projects is we've established committees. We may want to look at a Bayfront committee to look at issues that design and community involvement, because we want the community to be involved anyway to support this, and maybe getting a group of people together to work on it might be a good idea.
Either that, or maybe this is one that we just need to hang on to right here, and we're the committee, and get as many people from the public involved as we can, so that they actually come to the meetings. But anyway, we'll go from there. All right, why don't we move on with the agenda at this time? We're going to definitely open it up to everybody to speak. So, Patrick, I think in terms of your concept and what you came up with, the next stage was comments from Orient and Western. Is that right? Would you like to come forward? Thank you.
Hello, agency members. My name is Xiang Chen. I'm with Orient Western Development, and I believe that Pat has...
we need to get you right by the microphone because you're not coming across.
Thank you. Pat is distributing a package for the agency members to review. I'd like to kind of split our comments into two parts. First is to respond to the excellent presentation made by staff, and then the second will be during the agency's consideration of the resolution itself. The first is that we do think that the work that staff has done and that Pat has done is very good. I might want to point out that during our work with the redevelopment agency staff, we did consider many ways of approaching an urban destination retail project here in Emeryville. And the first concept that we worked with was the regional shopping center anchored by fashion department stores. As we went further into the exclusive right to negotiate period, and as we encountered the realities of the department stores, we did look and drew upon our own experiences into other forms of urban destination retail, and we suggested a number of things, right? One is we did suggest phasing at a very early stage. We do regard the hotel to be a distinct part and separate part with economics and timelines very much of their own. And we did suggest phasing in the hotel. We also, as the months went by and our progress with the department stores became more difficult to make, which we will go over later on, we did also look into the phasing of the retail project also. And urban entertainment destination retailing was and is, the concept which we suggested to staff and was the project which we wanted to implement as a first phase. So much of what you see out there on the screen and, the fine presentation and analysis made by Mr. Pioli are certainly concepts and products and economics and frameworks of how Emeryville can move into the future, which we agree with. We entirely agree with that. And beginning with our last presentation before you, we talked even more seriously with staff about this phased approach and this for retail and hotels separately. And we also talked about how the retail could really proceed, without the anchor fashion department stores. We did, together with staff, go over what we had in terms of the tenants that we could put in on a fairly rapid basis to a project of this sort. And very soon after our initial meetings with Pat and with Ron, we proceeded to go and put together what we thought was necessary for this type of project to occur. So, I congratulate the staff, and we think everything that they said in terms of the type of product that has to be there, and the phasing, which should occur, and the very tricky type of, not tricky, but, the more than usual type of development and the special skills that need really to go into an urban retail destination center. I think those are all very accurate. We must have a team that has the experience in terms of this type of urban entertainment destination retail project. And with that in mind, we went and looked at the situation anew. Now, and we did put together a group of tenants and a augmented development team, which we think is very suited for pursuing this project in a manner which we believe is consistent with the vision and the response which we made to the redevelopment agency's request or proposal, which we responded to and which we won. Now, I think I've taken a lot of time already. What I'd like to do is have the opportunity to speak to you after. I'm sure there are many eager people here who would like to take this podium, and I'd like to be able to have a chance again at the very end to go over some of our further matters which we would like to talk to you about. Thank you very much.
All right, are there others in the audience that would like to make a presentation or to address the agency at this time?
Hello, I'm Tony Beatty from BT Commercial, representing Harcroft Pigments, Birmingham Steel Corporation. I also want to say job well done for the staff report. There's a lot of very encouraging things that I heard from that report. I couldn't help but notice from Ron's presentation that much of the material he was presenting was from ICSC, which I've been hearing that to both Orient and Western has been very diligently attending and on a very consistent basis, as well as Ron has, to kind of get their thumb on the heartbeat of retail. And indeed, that's where you do it. Well, I want to announce tonight that if you do go to the ICSC, which is a world-renowned convention, that the Barbary Coast site is in contract with the largest developer at that convention. In other words, the largest developer in the United States today, Barbary Coast is in contract with for their portion of the Bayfront. And I have tonight with me John Greer from Opus Southwest, who will speak after I do. But I think that the view of the Bayfront, like many of you have said, really is the doorstep to Emeryville, and the whole Bayfront makes sense to take a look at. The ERN for the past 20 months plus has really prohibited a lot of folks like Opus to take a look at the whole Bayfront. As a result, we've just looked at Barbary Coast, and we have a plan that we're going to present to you shortly tonight, not in-depth, but kind of a concept. And if you'll stand on top of that bridge, the Shell Mountain Bridge, and you look out, I sometimes dodge around those no entry things. But that's the best place to show interest in Emeryville. You can see the exciting opportunities there. We're just now opening this up. I encourage and support the fact that the city opens this up to the general public to get involved with. And in fact, for the first time, I'm a little hesitant about an extension or another RFP, because actually buyers are talking to sellers now. We're talking about projects. The value of the land really preempts having big boxes. I noticed on the presentation that the Barbary Coast site was not included except on the big box concept. We were included on that slide. I'm not sure why, because big boxes are pretty much, as I understand it, done for the city of Emeryville just from a destination standpoint. They just won't, the market won't support any more big boxes. But I am concerned about some of the residential, the office components, the very intense small retail components of some of the mixed-use projects, just from a financing standpoint and a fact of, going dark. Talk about going dark in auto mall. If that concept doesn't work, you've got a big project that just automatically 100% went dark, and that's of some concern to us. But it's most certainly a specialty retail destination. I agree with the staff's assessment of that. What that means is really a subject of, I agree, of some study. We certainly have our ideas of what that means. The land dictates that it means that it's specialty destination retail. It's not big box. And I think that we're very excited about having the opportunity to present to the city the Barbary plan, but we certainly have a developer that, number one, doesn't need to look for financing. It's all there. They're the largest developer in the United States, ahead of the Hahn Company, the Simon Company, DeBartola. This is the largest developer in the United States. They're real players. They don't have to go out and search for another player that has money that wants to put a project together. And talk about mixed-use expertise and experience. Some of you may have had a chance to look at some of the material I've given you, but this developer has as much mixed-use experience in terms of development, including hotels and residential, office, and retail, than any other developer out there today. So I'm bringing to you today a very qualified, serious player that has its heart and thumbprint on the retail heartbeat of the market that I'm excited about and really want to work with the city in terms of putting something together. Again, we're working in concert with the landowners right now, and I'm nervous about another RFP. Just in terms of, we've got an open window right now. Let's kind of smell some of that salt air coming off the bay and see what the market's telling us. That's one thing. We can study it in committee, but I think the last 20 months the market told us a lot, and now I'd like to have an opportunity to tell you guys what the market's telling us, and we're roaring and ready to go with some real horsepower.
Before you introduce your next person, I'm losing you there a little bit. You're
retailers ranging from 8,000 square feet up to 40 at the tops. We feel that what we are talking about is a complement to what Catella is, a transition between what Catella's did and what we have at Powell Street Plaza. We have certainly office experience. I think the question that you will have with the South Bayfront is putting together enough tenants to get an office building off the ground. I'm here just more as a matter of information as anything else, just to tell you we're here. We're going to work with the Barbary Coast site. If you, in your deliberations, decide to do something different than you have been on the Bayfront, then we would certainly be interested in helping you with that. We're here to be complementary rather than adversarial. That's all I have to say.
within the concept of the square footage you're talking about. Could you give us an idea of what kind of retailers you would envision for that kind of square footage?
We're talking, for the 14 and a half acres, which is what the Barbie Coast nets out to be, we're talking about 150,000 square feet. These will range from Old Navy types of stores in the 8,000 square foot range to something like Linens and Things, which is a soft goods, sort of like, I guess Home Express is probably the nearest thing close into the Bay Area. There's a new Linens out in Pleasanton. It's a little bit higher end. For the types of economics that we're talking about for the South Bayfront, by definition, you are going to get higher end retailers. That's the only people that can afford to pay these types of prices. There would be, I would anticipate, another book user. You have Borders in town now. I would anticipate something like a Barnes and Noble. There are additional concepts that have not come to the Bay Area yet. There's a program called Linens and Little Things, which is a baby or toddler specialty store. Again, very high end. That is a 15,000 square foot concept. So things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Berg, appearing tonight in behalf of Parkcross. I would suggest that the key question for you is one of the initial questions raised by staff. Do you proceed with a request for proposal to accomplish the end that you want, and at the end which many of the property owners want, or do you try a new approach? 2 years ago, we competed with Orient and Western and made a presentation with Catellus on board and the two property owners. The result of the definition in the request for proposal, limiting it to high-end retail, was that one, you're here tonight with nothing having been built, and two, now a revisiting of the concept because the definition was too narrow. I would suggest that while encouraging work has been done by staff and by Dave Paoli, that the real question for you, and I would encourage you strongly to abandon the RFP process, because you've had before you now another strong developer through John Greer, who's a possibility here. The problem is as much procedure. It's sort of a field of dreams or spec planning, if you will, and that puts the city at risk because you end up with a lights-out situation. I mean, there was talk about lights going out. The lights have not come on, and I would suggest that the RFP process limits and discourages everyone except the one developer with the one set of criteria that you have. If you have a developer such as Opus, who is willing to put its talent and money at risk, then rather than having a field of dreams situation where you hope that your design is something which matches the marketplace, you have something submitted where at least you have the property owner and the developer submitting something which will hopefully meet your criteria. You still retain all of the land use restrictions that you have. You still have the ability for staff and yourselves to dictate what happens in the city. But I think the key question here in the linchpin decision is whether or not you go through an RFP process. And I would submit to you that it hasn't worked. You've lost one developer, and fortunately we were able to maintain relationships with John Greer, who is now back. And it's not often that you get a second chance. I would encourage you not to keep this from happening again, because we are now 2 years. It's almost, we'll have an anniversary here shortly of an endeavor that was not successful. I don't think you want that, and we certainly don't on behalf of the property owners. Thank you.
Just before you come on up, it's okay. I'd just like to say for the TV audience out there, massive as it is, so you understand where we are. If you've just kind of tuned in the last 15 minutes for the normal 7:15 council meeting, that meeting has not started yet. We're running late on the start of that meeting. This is part of a special meeting in which we're considering what we're going to do and where we ought to be going with the South Bayfront. This is a study session that we're in right now, and when this session is through, we will be moving on to the regular council meeting. So I just want to make that clear in case somebody either comes in now late or catches us on the tube. I also have to just say that as I look out in the audience, it's kind of comical to me. It's not the typical audience that we have for our council meetings, and I definitely see a few more suits tonight than we normally do. So I guess that says something about the nature of this project. Please go forward.
It's the first time I've not worn a tie.
It's been duly noted.
I'm Monroe Townsend, with principal with Orient and Western. We represent ourselves here, and I want to point out, just clarify and try to restate or state where we are today relative to the ERN. We are in a given 5-year process, 20 months into it. We outlined in our response to you essentially what you had said you wanted, and it wasn't narrowly defined product that you said you wanted to achieve on the Bayfront property. We responded to it because we thought that was an appropriate product. In fact, the only thing that has changed since then, there are really two changes. The advent of department store sort of unavailability during this past 20 months because of the incredible financial turmoil that they've been in. And the second thing is the phasing, which really came up to us in our discussions with the outside world, of course, but also our discussions among ourselves or with the staff. And those are the only changes. Our concept now that we began to hit on about 6 months ago, and that now staff has, not coincidentally, in fact, confirmed, is a non-department store anchored retail center with almost entirely the same tenants that we've been working with a few exceptions who wouldn't come, and those exceptions wouldn't come without a fashion department store, fashion-oriented department store. But for the most part, the same tenants that we intended to have in this regional anchored, department store anchored center are expressing the same kind of heightened interest to come to this site with a phase project without department stores in the first phase. We are not ruling out department stores at all, simply leaving the door open in a later phase, but we believe and we are confident that we can go ahead with a project that, except for the department stores, will contain exactly or almost exactly the same kind of tenant mix in a less dense form. With respect to the hotel, last summer, we suggested that it would be appropriate from a readiness standpoint to move ahead with the hotel separately in advance as a first phase. And we were told by the staff that that was not an acceptable alternative to pursue at that time. We're pleased to see that has changed, and we are ready, as we were then, to move ahead with the first phase now if it's a hotel. And we'll speak about timing of the rest of it later. But I wanted to point out to you that, contrary to what Mr. Berg has said, the ERN defined a product which is still intact with the phases. It's just that the first phase that we plan to go ahead with might not even be retail. It might be hotel. We're prepared to do that. If it is retail, it would be retail that would be not anchored in the first phase with a fashion-oriented department store. And that is the sum total of the change.
Hi, I'm Veronica Raffel, and I'm with Raffel Wrestler Retail Group, and I, as you know, work with Orient Western. I just wanted to clarify something. We keep throwing the terms around big box, traditional retail, and what's really going on here. I agree with Mr. Harper, and it's something as the merchant who's helping put together this tenant mix have really worked with. We've tried to keep the integrity of what Emeryville is trying to do and what it means to be space. I live over here, so I know what exists and what's missing. The Powell Street Plaza, I think, has really gone through a transition to where it is really now functioning well as a center. A couple of the stores in there would like larger space, which I think everyone's aware of. In looking at with Opus, by the way, I wasn't that familiar with Opus as a regional mall person, and I understand they do big box. What you're describing with Linens and Things, Marshalls, TJ Maxx is more big box. Barnes & Noble, we've got a letter from them looking to come in what we've planned as a project, but in conjunction with traditional retail that you would find in a regional mall or a specialty center anchored by entertainment. I think we have to be very clear on these terms. It's important that the integrity from a Powell Street, which is really, for in all intents purposes, off-price, and then you've got Catellas, which is big box, destinational retail. What we're trying to do is bridge this with the traditional retail, the Limited, the Gaps, the Pottery Barn, the Williams-Sonomas. These people can do street deals, they can do regional malls, but they will not go with discounts. Just wanted to clarify that point.
Is there anyone else that would like to be heard this evening?
Well, my name is Sheng Chen. I'm with Orient Western, and thank you for having the opportunity to speak to you again, agency members. I want to praise the most perspicacious observations of Mr. Beatty, who now has come to the conclusion that urban destination retail was indeed the appropriate product to come to the South Bayfront. Now, if I recall my memory correctly, the same Mr. Berg and the same Mr. Beatty, several months ago, had presented the argument that the agency members should let the market dictate. And if I recall correctly, at that point, the market was dictating no urban destination retail. In fact, at that time, had Orient Western not come into the scene and had the only response to the RFP been the big swing of Catellas and the big boxes down through the Southwest, the South Bayfront in one massive swoop, the market would have dictated not an urban destination retail village concept, but rather the off-price big box product, which I don't believe the city agency members thought was appropriate there. That was not the vision that you had there. That was not the vision we had there. We have stayed very consistent to our view, and we have adjusted to the realities that we face now. But we think that the work that we've done has contributed significantly to maintaining this appropriate use for the South Bayfront, and would caution the agency members into thinking that the all-knowing free market really does bring a very complex social and economic situation to what the council people and the city of Emeryville would truly want.
Anybody else would like to be heard during this study session? Again, we will be taking this up as part of our redevelopment agency agenda, or the actual resolution that's on will be considered at that time, and certainly anybody that wants to speak again at that time would be invited to do so. Anything further at this time? Before we leave this, I guess, Patrick, just because it seems to be a logical place to ask staff, I still have the confusion relative to the RFP process that I had when I made my question to Mr. Beatty, and it's certainly been spoken to by at least one other person. What is your thought in terms of the RFP process and whether it's limiting or beneficial, or where we ought to be going, or at least thinking about going on that?
Well, I think what the RFP process does is it allows you to look at a number of different proposals rather than just one, and that's why I'm suggesting that you go through that. I think it will make it a reasonable period of time, 30 to 60 days, long enough for people to develop a proposal, but short enough that we're not tying things up. And then at the end of that time, if there aren't any other proposals except for Opus's, then I think the direction and the answer probably is pretty clear at that point. However, if you have several with different aspects to them, I think you may want to take a look at that. In the meantime, I was carefully listening about what it is that Opus has tied up and what's involved in their proposal. And I think I heard them pretty clearly say it was the Barbary parcel, which is not part of the site that we're suggesting that we solicit proposals on.
Right, and it seems to be that some of the concern that I heard expressed there sort of presupposes that the RFP again is very structured and very limited, and I don't think staff's really contemplating that. You're proposing if we go back out to go with a mixed use kind of a thing, so that pretty much leaves the door wide open to somebody coming in, as opposed to coming in with something as restrictive perhaps as we did a couple of years ago when we thought that we could start out with an anchored fashion department store.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mayor Cassis, I want to be absolutely clear on this. The area of the RFP will be identical to the existing area. There's no thought of enlarging it?
Well, attached to your staff report is site plan number 1, and that shows the area that we originally sent out an RFP on. Now, earlier in my staff report to you, I said we may want to consider having a dashed line showing how the area could be expanded up to Powell. But I am not suggesting that the Barbary Coast parcel become part of the RFP.
That's the clarification that I want. Thank you.
And why is that necessarily? I mean, why couldn't somebody come in and discuss the whole thing? I mean, obviously there's a contract going on, but I mean, in the same way, the Barbary Coast developers may be interested in coming in with a broader plan for the whole site.
It would not preclude someone making a development proposal that included Barbary Coast. But in order to implement this mixed-use idea, we don't need to have the Barbary Coast parcel, and I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that they are negotiating with the developer for a development proposal. Now, if they come together, that would be great. I think it would be wonderful to comprehensively plan the area, as you mentioned earlier, but it's not essential that they do so. I think what we do need to keep our eye on is make sure that what happens with Barbary is compatible with what we do and vice versa.
Okay. I'd just like to follow up the study session. I mean, it seems to me part of what you're asking for is some guidance from the agency here as to where we're going, and I think that we can certainly get into that at this point before we get to the regular agenda, because there we're really considering the resolution as this. So in terms of, I'd just like to take us through very quickly, as agency members, a couple of the considerations on the land use. Well, maybe we ought to take it in the order. I mean, let's talk about the very first question, the agency's role, whether it ought to be active or passive. Could we have some comments from the agency members as to what their guidance for staff would be on that issue?
Mayor Cassis, I'd like to see that the agency, considering the fact that this is the agency's land and we have a fairly substantial front of the agency to stand passive, I think we must take an active role.
Is there anybody that disagrees with that? I mean, it seems like that's correct.
I don't care one way or another. I think it's just a matter of however it takes to get a plan in front of us that makes sense. I mean, we've never taken an active role before. We have 23% of the land. If you don't consider the Barbary property, bring in the Barbary property, and our percent is much less, and seems like our land is taken up by the hotel idea anyway. So once you go out there and you say whatever else you want to do with the rest of it, we're pretty set on this hotel. You're taking us out of it anyway in terms of the planning aspects of it. So I think we could go either way. It's just a matter of coming up with the best plan, and I'm not sure taking an active role will necessarily do that, but I've advocated for a long time that we get more involved with these projects, and we never have before. It's interesting that we are now, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Nora, when you say active role, does that mean would you want to see a committee get involved with looking at it, or just be more informed or assertive? Or?
Well, Mayor Cassis, if I can respond to Vice Mayor Bukowski, I think Mayor Cassis's idea that this board acts as a committee, and yet we have some outreach into the community and go to hold meetings like we've done in the past on Chiron and Sybase and Kaiser, but that essentially to keep the process flowing, that we be the ones that are sitting here making the decision. I definitely think we need public input, though.
You might want to rope some of the planning commission into this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And this, I mean, that might even be a good basis for a joint meeting with the COB. I see you ducking back there, but Bob, do you have
Well, I think that we should be involved in it. From the standpoint is that we only have a limited partnership in it as far as the hotel is concerned. But I certainly agree that I would like to see more citizens come out to these, have more meetings, and have more citizens come out and have the input and get their input into it. I think it'd be very helpful.
And for my part, I'm not willing to sit back on this one. I think we got to roll up our sleeves and get in, because otherwise, and I think it makes it tough on staff, because it's just sort of like, here's this big piece of property out there, and what do we want? And if we just kind of throw it open and say whatever, without really digging in, we're going to have a whole bunch of things, including card room proposals or any number of things that aren't going to fly. So let's keep a hold of this from the get-go. Even if we go to the mixed-use concept and expand our horizons, I don't think that's any reason for us to let go of it in terms of indicating to the development world out there the kind of thing that we're looking for, so that everybody doesn't waste a bunch of time and effort and money on something that simply in the final analysis isn't going to happen. So that would be my feeling there also. So you have a good enough sense there on that issue. Let's go on to the land use alternatives. And maybe I'll take them out of order. But let's take the big box approach for starters.
Mayor Cassis, before you get into that, I'd like to ask the city attorney a question. All of these uses in the present zoning and under the present general plan have rights to come forward to develop there, right?
Correct.
I'm a little uneasy that, what are you suggesting? We are prejudging here about what these land uses should be. I have a little discomfort with that, and I'd like to have some input from you.
Well, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the council giving some directions about what it would like to see out there, but certainly it can't, a regional or a big box type of development, the sort of retail that entails, that is a permissible use in the area. But certainly I don't think it precludes the agency from giving direction to the staff as to what it would like to, if the idea is to maintain an active role in here and go through this RFP process and set out in detail what it is, or maybe it's not in detail, what type of use you would like to see there as between these two, I think you can do that.
Okay, let's take that up. Anybody want to comment on the big box approach?
Yeah. Well, I think it's ironic, but we're in this problem we put ourselves into this big box of our own. Big box should go there. If you take out the consideration that Catella's property has big box, the site just begs for big box. Instead of doing what was done at East Bay Bridge, where you've got everybody with their back to the traffic and the need for a hideous 200-foot sign, you could give all of those retailers frontal exposure onto the freeway. And I can understand why Barbary Coast and some others and why that was tempting to do. If this was a problem with putting something as inappropriate as big box onto the East Bay Bridge site. You want to do this cute little village concept. The problem with the cute little village concept at this location is that there's nothing to play off of. It's isolated, and it'll look like a Disneyland. People will go on the street and say, isn't that cute? We've got little streets in there with little people going around. We've got all kinds of architecture that doesn't make any sense because there's nothing to play off of. I also like to see one of these little villages that is within 50 yards of 20 lanes of freeway. Everybody's always, scoffed when I
said just turn it into duck ponds, because, I mean, you got to take into consideration there's a substantial noise factor out there. And if you're going to build an essentially outdoor retail area, you got to deal with that. And that's why I like the original Orient and Western, because I think they dealt with that, and they looked at that site and said, we got to go inside if it's going to work. And I appreciate the fact that the market may not drive that, but I think we're going to find out with this RFP that once everybody gets out there with their meters and stuff, and they start looking at what they can play off of in terms of a concept, they're going to draw a bunch of blanks. You take that concept and put where East Bay Bridge is, it would make a lot of sense, because there's a lot of neighborhood around there to join into, to play off. This is an isolated site, and as much as, I'm not saying put big box there, I'm just saying that we put big box in the wrong place, and that's why we're in this box.
Yeah, anybody else like to comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think that I listened to the developers that have been speaking tonight, and that they're saying is that big box, it seems as though that it's a risk that we would be taking if we did put big box out there, because it doesn't seem as though big box is selling anymore. It seems as though that if there's, what I'm hearing, what I've heard tonight is that there has to be a mixed use, and it has to be something kind of like a regional mall. If it's going to be something like Powell Street Plaza, I think it's going to work, because I think Powell Street Plaza is doing very good. I'm not too much as far as big box is concerned.
Ken, did you want to add anything?
I just want to make sure that we establish some kind of a theme for the whole area, and that it doesn't get separated or so it doesn't work well together. And again, the issue of circulation over there really needs to be looked at, because that's the way people are going to get in and out of there, and that's how they're going to shop there, and that's what's going to really make it work or not work. So I want to make sure you're involved as far as making sure it's consistent and it works well together.
And for myself, notwithstanding Greg's comments, I mean, we're here now, and the question is where do we go from here? Catellus is a reality. And so, I think for all of us, the goal is to try to make this project as successful as we can, and to make it more something that in terms of design and use, that the whole community can be proud of, instead of some of the concerns that were raised relative to the Catellus site. We've heard already from the people that seem to be in the know that we've probably saturated big box in Emeryville anyway, and wouldn't want to be competing with our own project. And certainly in terms of design, architecture, the stamp that we want to put at this gateway, I would not favor at this time that as being a direction that I would emphasize. Again, it doesn't preclude somebody from coming in with that, but I would say that from my own thinking at this point, that someone would have to be running uphill against a pretty good wall to convince me to change, at least conceptually, where I think that ought to go. So does that give you some idea on that issue? What about the auto mall? Let's consider that one. What any agency members wish to comment on that?
Greg, my only comment on that is that the one advantage to it that wasn't mentioned, and I'm not advocating for it, but it is substantially less in terms of traffic, and we haven't seen yet what the total effect of the traffic on Powell and Christie is going to be with the projects that are already planned. The auto mall had the advantage of being a low use, an inexpensive use that, in terms of build out, that might enable us to see whether or not we've overbuilt already in terms of that key intersection.
Anybody else?
I really cannot get excited about an auto mall. I think it's been tried in certain areas and just fell absolutely flat in its face. I'm thinking about San Francisco. I would not be enthusiastic about the auto malls. I kind of tend to go along with Bob. I think my bias and preference here is this mixed-use option, keeping our options open, and also keeping our options open for perhaps a possible residential use, making better use of that site by going up a little bit, rather than single-story buildings.
Ken?
I don't know what the feasibility of getting an auto mall is, and if you're talking about numerous dealerships as opposed to one, but certainly the tax benefit is substantial, and the traffic is limited with that. So I think we should keep our options open and see what the possibilities are, and consider that along with the rest of them.
Bob, anything on that?
I would not favor Automall at all. I think that if they only use Automall at certain periods of time, at certain periods of time you would have the city that would sit there and it would be vacant and it would be idle because there'd be no one there except for all these lights and all these cars that you'd have parked out there for people just to pass by and look at. So I'm not in favor of Automall at all.
Yeah, I think for myself, even though certainly the sales tax looks attractive, in the one sense, it just again it would seem to me to be a real waste of a piece of prime real estate to have a bunch of cars parked out there, which we're going to end up with to some degree anyway with the retail and whatever else we're doing. So, okay, let's move on then to, and it seems to me that, and Nora, you've already spoken to this, but it seems to me that maybe we can combine our discussions of the regional mall and the mixed use because there's some interplay there. Anybody want to have any specific comments relative to that? Well, we're kind of taking the last two land use alternatives, the regional mall versus kind of mixed use. We've kind of spoken to big box and the auto. And on Patrick's agenda here, those were the other two uses that staff was looking for some guidance on. Seems to me we could talk about those together.
Well, I think I've already made my comment as far as I'd like to see the mixed-use project go in, you know. I think that what I've heard tonight is that it seems that the trend is going is that it would be a mixed-use project, and I would like to see that.
Okay, others? All right, I guess for myself, on that, we did start out with the idea of the department store anchor, and as we're hearing even from Orient and Western, although that may not be feasible right now, when the shakeout settles, and Federated, I guess, who's the main player in the region here, gets through doing whatever they're going to do with openings and closings and conversions, maybe the other retail will be the draw to want them to come in, as the brothers have indicated here before. Again, looking at the big picture of what we have here, I think one of the goals of the agency, from I think all of our perspective, is diversity. It's been said many times that we don't want to fall back into the rut that the city of Emeryville had in its history in terms of the kind of tax base that it had from the kind of business that was here. And so what we're trying to do, I think, is create real diversity in terms of where the revenue to the city is coming from, so that as we go through different phases and different ups and downs and cycles in the business world, that we're able to sustain ourselves. And it seems to me that in terms of this retail, and leaving kind of out small retail, because we certainly want to encourage that. It will always be a focus here in the city. But we've got the big box retail over at Catellus. And at Powell Street Plaza, we've got the off-price retail, as that term is referred to. So I very much favor whatever kind of mixed use we roll into on the South Bayfront of having that be upscale. And part of the reason that I want that is because a goal here, again, is to create the kinds of not just revenue-producing developments in the city for our future tax base, but also to create the kinds of services and goods that are available right here in our own community, so that we don't have to be jumping in a car and driving to Hilltop or Southland or to Walnut Creek or to San Francisco. So I still very much favor trying to go to the upper end of the scale to the degree possible, so that we have a real diversity then of the kinds of retail that exist here in town. And I certainly also like the idea of the incorporation of entertainment, though as we know from even some of the entertainment we have in the city now, that creates its own kinds of police problems and security problems that we need to deal with. So Patrick, with that, does that give you enough? Mr. Beatty, you seem to want to say something. Come on.
A couple things. One thing on the mixed use, I think one thing we have to keep in mind with the residential use perhaps is that we're in a whole different ballgame with remediation, environmental remediation. I mean, there's some significant differences between cleaning sites to residential standards as there is commercial standards. That's a part of the equation that really needs to be looked at carefully. Secondly, we can debate, about what's big box, for example, what Orient Western thinks big box is compared to what we think big box is, but the economics will filter down to where it's really going to be what the redevelopment agency approves of and what tenant mix agrees to go there. My point, my issue here is that if you compare the qualifications of the experience and just the wealth of experience in the financing between, for example, an Orient Western and the Opus, it's not comparable. It's not even close. I think it's important for us to look at in working with the city, which we know that we have to work with the city. We'd rather have the market come to us, but we know that we will work closely with you. It will be a partnership, but that we ask you to carefully look at qualifications and capabilities.
Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak?
My name is Sheng Chen, Orient Western, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again. Tony, this is getting kind of fun.
Not for us.
I'm very sorry, but I'm glad that Mr. Beatty has brought up the Orient Western name in such high regard, and how we see the mighty company of Opus come slamming down on this, the Ched brothers and Mike Townsend and Veronica Raffel. However, what I would like to do is to once again put up some facts. What we've put before you, the package that you see there, does a few things. One is that we do want to confirm the strength of the team that we brought to Emeryville as an appropriate team to do the regional shopping center development anchored by a fashion department store. In our team, we did have the leasing expertise of Dick Schneider. We had the Yarmouth Group, which has 20 over regional shopping malls of the fashion sort, and we have the leasing expertise of Rafael Russler, who represents local, small local and not too small local shopping centers here in the Bay Area, the Ceremony Center, and that has good lasting relationships with national retailers. Now, however, I'd like to compare the capacities of our augmented team. I'd like to the Redevelopment Agency to look carefully at the brochure which we've given to you, and the new group which you see the brochure for is called Madison Marquette. It isn't a big name, like Opus is, with the many divisions that does industrial, office, and retail developments with a list of tenants such as Toys R Us and such as Walmarts and other such large boxes. I'm sure they do other retail also, but not listed in the information which we managed to garner. The group that we brought before you is Madison Marquette. Right? The principals of Madison Marquette are four gentlemen, right? And I'd like to draw attention particularly to two of the gentlemen. One is a Mr. John Bourne, and the other is a Mr. James Bennett. Right? Mr. James Bennett was the director of leasing, head of leasing for all of J&B Federated Realty. Right? At its peak, having at his command, if you will, the portfolio of J&B Federated at that time, which was significant, having acquired not only the Canadian shopping centers, but also the shopping centers here in the United States. At their peak, they had the ear, the relationships with all these fine retailers, which we would like to bring in, we believe do belong here in Emeryville, the likes of the Limited, the Gaps, the Eddie Bauers, and those which we hope will see the light and come along with us, and some of whom have already seen the light and given us letters saying that they'd come along without the anchor department stores. The second gentleman is a Mr. John Bourne. Mr. John Bourne was a CEO of J&B Federated at its peak, all right, and had I believe billions of dollars in shopping centers alone. Right? Now, what's I think specifically significant for the type of village development, the urban destination retail development, which we so happily saw and so wonderfully presented by Mr. Paoli and the staff, is that John Bourne also worked for the Rouse Company and rose very high in the ranks of Rouse before becoming the CEO of J&B Federated. One of the early projects which he did do, he was the project director, right, was Town Hall in Quincy Market. Probably one of the best, right? And certainly I think most of the people in the architectural world, the retail world, would recognize this to be a very fine implementation of the village concept. Please look at the brochure which we've given you, and I believe that they refer specifically to the village concept and what they think they are especially strong at. And I know Mr. Agency Member Harper is a very well-read man and has very insightful comments, but I will point out that the Quincy Market and the Faneuil Hall is not too much more than 50 yards from the big major freeway that goes right through Boston. And that was implemented by a person who now comes to our team and who, Mr. Bennett, their member, a principal of the firm, has written a letter for you that indicates their strong belief, as is the belief of Opus, that this should be an urban retail type of project, and their commitment to doing the project with us. And we have augmented our team to reflect the new circumstances we find in. And as we address the renewal, the extension or the consideration of the resolution, I'd like to talk to you further about that matter. Thank you.
Well, one more round, Tony, or are we done? All right, anybody else from the audience? There.
A quick comment. I think perhaps the council missed a salient point here. We appeared on behalf of Harcross. There seemed to be maybe it's historical because of our Barbary relationships. The owners of the Harcross property would like to have the pleasure of dealing with the possibility of dealing with Opus with regard to their property. I mean, it's not a mind-boggling concept, but I think it's being missed here. I would suggest to you that that the issue here is not solely a question of a beauty contest between proposed planners or developers of the property. What's not being discussed is that there isn't a development today that isn't built on land, and we're here in behalf of the owners of the land. So I realize, frankly, we don't think it's fun to be sitting here, even though perhaps the Orient Western group does, and to banter about in a beauty contest fashion who can be the best planner and who can give you the longest Yellow Pages list of ICSC people. We have an opportunity to actually do something. That is, the property owner, Harcross, would like to talk freely to Opus or other suitors. What seems to be, to use a metaphor here, is that the RFP process that you're wanting to engage in is the arranged marriage type of situation, which takes out one of the primary parts of the partnership, and that is the partner, the property owner. So please consider that what we were trying to get across is, one, that we are talking to Opus because John Greer and Opus have actually entered into deals for purchasing land, have actually built something, and that's evidence, and the strongest evidence of ultimate credibility. And the question before us now is the Harcross property and other properties. It seems to me that we're totally missing that point, which is fundamental here, that no matter who is the developer, they have to own the land. And that has to be addressed in the ability not only to develop, but to take down the land.
Do you have anything further? Any other comments from the agency?
Yeah. Does that mean that Harcross would hesitate to sell their property for one project as opposed to another? It would seem to me that if, they're going to get the same thing out of either scenario, that they would be just as a willing player. I don't understand why.
Absolutely, Harcross would be open to it. But what we've learned from the RFP process is that even that the RFP process has closed the ability of a property owner to even have discussions with the holder of that right. Orient and Western across the board refused to have meaningful discussions and to make meaningful offers with regard to taking down the land. That is not an experience which we want to repeat again with regard to the Harcross property.
Okay. Patrick, as I think we're talking about two different things here. It seems to me what has tied things up is the exclusive right to negotiate, not the RFP process. I mean, am I wrong on that, or?
That's correct, and they would be free to, and I would encourage them to submit a proposal for the Harcross property with Opus if they felt that that was the appropriate developer or any other entity.
All right. We didn't, as we were going through your agenda, we really didn't take up the RFP process versus not the RFP process. Is that the appropriate time now, or do you want us to do that under the redevelopment agency agenda?
Actually, you could do it under the agency agenda if you want. That's the subject of the resolution.
Okay. We'll hold that to then. All right. With that in mind, then, let's try to draw this to a close. We're an hour late starting our regular meeting. Joe?
I'm Joe Chen, principal with Orient and Western. I would like to correct an impression that Mr. Berg has made, which is that we have refused to talk to Harcross Pigments, as a matter of fact, and implying that we have not talked to the other landowners. Indeed, we have. I have been in direct contact with Mr. Groth and have been very solicitous of trying to understand what Harcross's objectives are, as we have with the rest of the landowners. And indeed, we are very anxious to be able to talk with Harcross at length about what their objectives may be.
Thank you. All right. With that, anything further from staff? I'll adjourn the special meeting of the redevelopment agency. What I'm going to suggest we do at this point is we've been going as a council here for about 2.5 hours. I'd like to just take a brief recess of about